It's okay to say, I need to live a little bit more. It's okay to say that I need to level up my skill before I can write this book the way that I want to write it. Hello and welcome to everyone who is listening to the Written in Melanin podcast, the place where you come to get your weekly dose of melanated creativity. I'm your host, CM Lockhart, an author of fantasy books featuring Black girls who aren't all that nice, and the owner of the Melanin Library, an online database of books written by Black authors. And in this space, I offer you everything I've learned on my journey as a Black and indie author. I'm glad you're here. So, welcome to episode number 30, you guys. And being completely transparent here, today's episode was going to be about a completely different topic, but it's just been kind of heavy on my mind to talk about taking your time with your writing process. So, game change, that is what we are talking about today. And it's just going to be a quick little discussion about being gentle with yourself and your writing process. So, that being said, there are a couple of things that have just been really heavy on my mind to share with you guys, and I am trying something new. So before I get into the 3 things that I have about taking your time with your writing process, I just kind of want to mention that for myself, I am also struggling with this, because taking time for yourself and being gentle with yourself and how you move through your process is something that is really difficult at times. And I know for me, I have had a very, very long struggle with trying to manage my time properly and being gentle with myself and being like, hey, it's okay if your book isn't out yet. It's okay if it's not ready yet. It's okay if you're not at this step of the process that you think that you should be at. And just kind of telling myself that on a regular basis. So that's kind of where this podcast episode is stemming from, and also because I've been in this phase where I am trying to make active changes with how I am using my time. So with that being said, if you are a regular listener of the podcast, first of all, thank you so much for listening. Second thing is, you can now watch the video version of the podcast on the YouTube channel, Written in Melanin. And the reason I make that announcement is because if you guys have been listening to the podcast, y'all know that I love to say I'm going to do things and then not necessarily follow through on them. So I'm in this phase of trying to be better with managing my own time and being gentler with myself and being honest with myself about what I can and cannot manage. And one of the things that I have been wanting to do is do a video version of the podcast for YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. I hope you take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, all that good stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to share that with you guys. So that being said, now that we've got my little tangent out the way, I'll probably come back to this because this has definitely been a process for me. It's not something that is just one and done. One day she woke up and was completely different. I wish it was that simple, but it's not. So that being said, let us get into the couple things that I felt really strongly about sharing with you guys, especially when it comes to managing your time, especially since I am in the middle of figuring this out for myself. So switching gears to actually talk about writing, since that's what this podcast is actually about, I wanted to point out that it is okay if your process is slower than what you think it should be, and to just be kind to yourself when the process takes longer than you expect it will be. So speaking specifically about writing, obviously I personally think that this applies across genre to any aspect of your life, but specifically with writing, especially if you are an indie author or self-published author and this is kind of your first book, your first foray into the self-publishing, indie publishing world. Be kind to yourself if it takes longer than you think it will, because it will definitely probably take longer than you think it will. And the reason that I say that it will take longer is because it is a process. It's something that you have to figure out as you're going along. And the more you do this, the more you learn, the more you're going to want to change things, the more you're going to want to improve things, the more you are going to think about, hey, is this what I really want to do? And there's going to be ups and downs for the process. And it's okay. That's literally part of the process. But I know going through it can be really frustrating, especially if you have this ideal timeline in your head. So like I said, I myself am not excluded from this. For my second book, I have a very strict timeline that I would like to adhere to. But in the middle of talking to my husband about, timelines and how things worked out for the first book, I realized that I am already behind if I want to change how things are done as far as getting my book out to ARC readers, because something that I've learned from publishing We Are the Origin, the first book, is that it takes about 3 months for ARC readers to actually read the book and post reviews. So I had not taken that into account when I set up the schedule for my next book. And to be completely honest, if I want my book to be out in the day with the reviews that I have in mind, let me say that. If I want my book to be out with the reviews that I have in mind, then I really need to have the book done by like November, December, instead of like January, February. And that is moving up the timeline a lot, because my novel, as of right now, I am planning for it to be somewhere around 120,000 words. The first book was around 110, so I'm giving myself a little bit of leeway with that. But I know what it is, and that's why I say sometimes the process is slower than what you think it's going to be, because I'm still going to make sure that the book is of the quality that I want it to be, that it answers all the questions that I want to answer it, and that it is a product that I'm happy with. It just may not be in the time frame that I think it's going to be in. My goal is still to have book 2 out by June of 2023, and I don't think I've made that a public announcement yet, but that is the goal. Book 2 for We Are the Origin, the sequel to it, should be out by June of 2023. That is what I'm currently aiming for, but we will see how that happens. And of course, if you're listening to the podcast, if you're following the YouTube channel, then you will get updates about that first and foremost. And if you subscribe to my Patreon, you will also get exclusive updates and such, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later in this episode. But all that to say that be kind to yourself. It's okay. It's okay. You're not failing. You're not doing anything wrong as an author. You are not terrible at what you're doing just because your process is taking longer than what you expect it to be. It's okay. It's like that for everyone. No matter how many times you do this, the timeline sometimes gets a little off. And if you don't believe me, you can go watch the videos of any author on TikTok who is transparent about their journey, and they will tell you that they are behind on their deadline. They set a pre-order date, and that pre-order date is going to have to be moved back by a week, a month, what have you. It happens. It's normal. It's okay. Be kind to yourself. You are not failing. Just get yourself together, get your footing, and move forward. That's what we do. So yeah. The second really big thing that I want to talk to you guys about is just that understand that living is part of writing, and you have to give yourself time to live. So this kind of goes back into the time management aspect, especially what I was talking about earlier in the podcast, just with myself and giving myself time to do things. It's one of those things where it's very easy to overwhelm yourself, to be like, I can do this and I can do that and I can do this and I can do that. And it's a beautiful thing when you can do all the things yourself, but time is a factor. And sometimes you don't give yourself enough time to do all the things that you want to do and to do them well. So understand that while yes, writing is a part of it, and especially when it comes to self-publishing and indie publishing, you are going to want to write as much and do as much work as you possibly can. And you're going to want to market all the time, and you're going to want to make sure that you're pushing yourself because you are in charge of yourself. It's a very easy trap to fall into, but you also have to remember that you have to give yourself time to live. You have to give yourself time to breathe. You have to give yourself time to rest. And I mean that in two aspects. So on the one hand, yes, I mean it very literally. You have to give yourself time to rest. You have to give yourself time to breathe. You have to give yourself time away from your project so that your brain does not get overwhelmed and start to overlook the little things, so that when you publish your book, you're not like, oh wow, how did I miss that? I should have caught that. So you have to give yourself literal time and space, but I also mean that in a much more metaphorical way. You have to give yourself time to live. And one of the things that I feel like I don't know if I talk about enough is the fact that it is okay to experience life if you feel like you want to add an aspect to your story. And I'm not saying like, oh, writing outside of your experience, because that's a completely different conversation, but I'm talking about just conversations with people. I'm talking about relationships with people, because at the end of the day, most books are focused around relationships with other characters, whether that be a best friend, whether that be a romantic interest, whether that be a parent, whether that be a stranger on the street. Most books are centered around the relationship of a main character with someone else. And it is okay to give yourself time to live, to go out and talk to people, to have those conversations, to broaden your perspective and to broaden your experiences so that you can bring them into the book. It's somewhat like giving yourself time to people watch, like, for sure, do that, but also don't forget to like talk to your own friends, don't forget to talk to your own family, don't forget to like interact with the humans around you, because it's very easy to get caught up in having to create that you forget to consume. And I know I kind of touch on that on multiple episodes of the podcast, but being a whole person when it comes to being an author is really important. And I know it's like a trap that I myself have fallen into from time to time, of being like, I have to create, go, 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 now. And I just want you guys to know that it doesn't have to be that way. And it's really honestly not healthy to think that way. So I'm trying to like warn you away from the pitfalls that I have already fallen down. So give yourself time, experience your life, give yourself time to rest. Understand that it's okay if your process is a little bit slower. And something that I have been coming to terms with, especially lately, because in the Discord server that I run, so if you're not supporting the Melanin Library, and slight note, my Patreon for We Are the Origin is different from the Melanin Library Patreon, which supports the Melanin Library as a free resource. So there are links to both of those if you want to know what they're about and what you get, but just know that they are different. And with the Melanin Library Patreon, there is a Discord server where we talk about all things Black and bookish, and it's an amazing community that I love having started and being a part of. And one of the things that we have been talking about recently is how there are an influx of authors recently talking about how long it has taken them to write their debut novels. And while I have talked about how long it's taken me to write We Are the Origin, I want to make it clear that personally, I believe that there is a difference between working on a book consistently, nonstop for 10 years, and then touching base with the book for 10 years. And 10 years is somewhat of an arbitrary number. I've seen a couple of authors mention that they've been working on their book for 10 years, so that's probably why it's in my head. But for the sake of argument, 10 years, right? And it's one of those things where it's just like, personally, my personal belief on this, and you guys can take it with a grain of salt as with everything that I say, right? I believe that there is a huge difference between fast drafting, which means like you just go with your first draft and like boom, that's it, that's the whole book, it's done, and spending 10 years working on a book. I think there is a happy medium in there, and I think there is this aspect of writing that isn't talked about very much, and that is knowing that it's okay to walk away from a story, and that walking away doesn't mean that you have to walk away from it forever. And what I mean by that is it's okay to acknowledge that at this point in time, you do not have the skills, you do not have the experience, you do not have the know-how that you want to write a book and tell the story the way that you want to tell it, that you have to grow as a person and as an artist before you can create what it is that you want to create. And I think that self-awareness is a huge skill that I think some authors would really benefit from, especially if we talked about it more, because I know for myself, I've written 2 books. The first one, Keeping Promises. The second one, We Are the Origin. Keeping Promises is a novella, and I've talked about this on a previous episode of the podcast, but when I thought of that story, it was when I was 17, and I was just wondering what my life would be like 10 years in the future, and the people, specifically the boys that I had relationships or knew or had crushes on, I wondered how I would feel about them as an adult if I ever saw them again. Because when you're 17 and you're in high school, that is your whole world. Everything is wrapped around that, and you can't really imagine a life where those people and those scenarios aren't top priority. They're not everything to you. And I wanted to imagine what that was like. And so Keeping Promises, that grew from the idea of like, hey, what if 10 years from now I'm at a high school reunion or 10 years from now, I run into this boy that I had an on and off relationship with. And I'm like, and if I was still single, would I still be into him? Would these feelings that I have now resurface? Would they still be as intense? Like, what would happen? And that's kind of where Keeping Promises bloomed from. And it became a story about childhood friends who had an on and off again relationship throughout all of high school, and they break up. And then, you know, in the future, originally it was going to be 10 years in the future. I think the end result was like 7 years in the future, or 5 years, or something like that. Anyway, in the future, they run into each other again, and they're both single. And it's just kind of like, what do we do with these feelings that never went away? And that kind of became the premise of Keeping Promises. But that being said, I tell you that to say that when I was 17, I was completely incapable of writing the final version of Keeping Promises. I had not lived long enough. I had not had enough time pass between high school to understand the emotions that those characters would have. I had not experienced life, and I had not experienced a true and sincere, genuine kind of love at that point to differentiate what you feel in high school from what you feel as an adult. I just didn't have enough life experience, and I didn't have the writing skill to write the book the way that I wanted to write it when I was 17. I didn't write that book until I was 23. And what I mean by telling you all that is that it's okay to walk away from the story, and it's okay to know that it's not going to be forever. It's okay to say, I need to live a little bit more. It's okay to say that I need to level up my skill before I can write this book the way that I want to write it. That doesn't mean that you can't write in the meantime, in between time, because in between me writing Keeping Promises, the idea for We Are the Origin came to my mind. So did half the ideas that I planned to write after I finished We Are the Origin. Like, I was still writing, I was still creating, I was still being an author. I just didn't write that book because I couldn't yet. And the same thing with We Are the Origin. There were aspects of Brandy that I could not write until I finished writing Keeping Promises, and I realized what I had done wrong so that I could improve from it. It's a process. It's a long process. And understanding that it doesn't all have to be right now, and understanding that you can give yourself time, and understanding that it's okay to grow, and it's okay to recognize that you need to grow before you can do what you want to do, is an important part of being not just an author, but a person, and a creative person at that. Sometimes you have to look at yourself objectively and be like, I need to grow before I can do what I want to do. And that's okay. And that kind of pulls me back to what I was saying about these authors who say that they're writing their books for 10 years. I'm not going to say it's a good or a bad thing, because honestly, it's not my place to say. Everyone has their own process. And like I said, some people, their timeline looks differently. But I know that for me, I could never work on a book consistently for 10 years, because at a certain point, I would look at myself and I would be like, okay, so why isn't this working? Why am I on the 8th, 10th, 15th, 20th, 67th draft of this book and I'm still not satisfied with it? What is the element of this book that I am not satisfied with it, and why can't I get there? And maybe that's just how I think, because when I was writing We Are the Origin, that's just how I think about the chapters in general. I think about, okay, if I'm not happy about this, what part of this chapter makes me unhappy? What part of it makes me feel like I need to rewrite it? Because generally my gut instinct isn't wrong, but I just want to know why, because I can't fix it if I don't know why. But that's a whole other conversation. If you guys want me to get into that, I absolutely can. Just let me know down in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, or you can get at me on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, if you absolutely have to, at CLockhartWrite. If you guys are listening to the podcast, or if you are signed up for my Patreon, you can just comment on the podcast, on the post episode. But this episode is getting a little bit on the long side, so I'm going to kind of wrap this up here. Just know that it is perfectly fine and okay if your process takes time. Be kind and gentle with yourself. If you need more time, it's okay. It's okay. It's part of the process. Remember to give yourself time to live as you are writing, and it's okay to give yourself time to walk away from a story and give yourself time to grow, if that's what you need to do. Walking away from a story does not mean you have to be walking away from it forever. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. Take it how you like. That being said, before I end this episode, I do want to give you guys a couple of quick updates, especially if you have been listening to the podcast regularly. So the first one is that I am changing the schedule for the podcast. It is going to be updating every other Wednesday instead of every Wednesday. Part of the reason for that is if you listen to the podcast regularly, you know that I have not been keeping up with that weekly schedule anyway. Part of the reason is I'm a perfectionist, so I like to make sure that the audio sounds exactly like what I want it to sound like before I post it to you guys. And I like to make sure that the episode is hopefully useful information. If it's not, I am known to just delete a whole recorded episode of the podcast because I don't like it. So chalk that up again to that perfectionist nature, but I'm going to try to do better. Also, the podcast season will be ending in November. So we're currently in September now. There will continue to be podcast episode updates until October and November, but I will be taking the month of December off and probably most of November for NaNoWriMo so that hopefully I can get book 2 written. That being said, if you'd like to keep up with me, I will be keeping my Patreon up to date. So if you'd like to be a part of that community, feel free to sign up. $5 gets you into the community, and I will be sharing everything from the title of book 2 to exclusive character art that I have commissioned to the cover art that is coming up to some of the exclusive snippets for book updates that I have coming for book 1 and for book 2. So if any of that sounds interesting, or you just like me and this podcast, you like my books, and you would like to support me as an author, then please consider joining my Patreon. It helps support and keeps me doing what I love doing. So that being said, for sure, check that out. There is a link wherever you are listening this at or watching. Check it out. Next thing, I will be offering coaching services. So something that I have been doing, you guys know that I love helping people any way that I can, especially when it comes to indie publishing and self-publishing and writing in general. So that being said, I've had several people reach out to me asking for my advice and for my help. And because I enjoy helping, I am going to be setting up actual coaching services. So if you would like me to help you one-on-one to publish your book, then please check out my website, writteninmelanin.com. I will be uploading the services there. I don't know if it'll be active as of the release of this particular episode, but I'm going to try to have it up so you guys can check it out. They are going to be reasonably priced because I'm not trying to gouge anyone. I really just want to help authors publish their book in a way that they are proud of. So if that's something you're interested in, you want to talk more in depth about indie publishing, self-publishing, what's right for you, and all the little tips, tricks, tidbits, resources that I have, for sure, check it out. There are going to be multiple tiers, so you can just pick which one works best for you in your book. So keep an eye out for that. And the last thing, I've already talked about this, but again, I do have a Patreon, so if you would like to support that, for sure, check it out. Starting in October, specifically the first week of October, I am going to be revealing some really special character art that I have been sitting on for book 2, and I cannot wait to share it with you guys. So if you're part of my Patreon, you will get it first. If you are not, then I will be saving it, and it will be part of the pre-order for book 2, but you will have to wait for when that is available. So that is everything, you guys. But yeah, that is it for this episode of the Written in Melanin podcast, you guys. Thank you so much for listening as I share what I've learned on my journey as a Black and indie author. If you'd like to support this podcast, then please share it with someone that you think may enjoy it. Join my Patreon at patreon.com/CMLockhart, or grab a copy of my book, We Are the Origin, from my website, cmlockhart.com. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications. The Melanin Chat streams every Tuesday, and new podcast episodes released every other Wednesday. There are links in the description box and the show notes for absolutely everything. Thank you guys again so much for listening. And until next time, may all your books be full of melanin. Bye.